Gen Zs are reshaping the world. News Generation shares their fresh perspectives on what's trending now. From global developments to everyday culture, we're diving into the stories that matter. This is News Generation.
The Korean wave is drawing more fans from all over the world. Local consumer prices continue to hover at the 2% census rate in April. Turning to robots to allow the visually impaired the chance to better indulge in cultural experiences. Like the number of hybrid cars are registered in South Korea has surpassed 2 million with this locally developed Yuri rocket.
Arirang. Gyeongju, a city that holds 1,000 years of history. The cherished values, preserved over time, have shaped who we are today. Now, through new encounters, we step into a better future. Sustainability, innovation. With the spirit of connection, a new millennium story begins. As APEC and Gyeongju come together. APEC meets Gyeongju.
The moment we wear it, our spirits lift. It helps us grow strong, in body and in mind. As we wear it, we learn patience and respect. The belt system motivates students to strive harder and continue growing. This uniform shapes movement into grace and turns performance into something thrilling. Now, embraced around the world, Taekwondo shares our culture, philosophy, and values with pride and spirit. Though it may seem simple, this uniform holds your passion and your journey. It belongs to Taekwondo. Wear the extraordinary. Be with Taekwondo.
Some 60 Koreans detained in Cambodia over job scams and other crimes are set to be returned home on Saturday. While in a related move, President Ejae ordered the deletion of illegal job ads offering work in Southeast Asia. South Korean officials held 2-hour-long tariff negotiations with their U.S. counterparts on Thursday in their latest efforts to narrow the gap on Seoul's $350 billion investment in Washington, ahead of the APEC leaders meeting taking place in South Korea later this month. The economy is recovering from a first-half downturn on the back of the government's stimulus coupon program, according to the finance ministry. The country also added 312,000 jobs last month, and its fastest year-on-year growth in 19 months. The government is moving to repatriate South Korean citizens detained in Cambodia while expanding efforts to curb overseas job scams. A charter flight is being prepared for their return, and the president has ordered the emergency removal of illegal recruitment ads luring Koreans to Southeast Asia. Our Pyongyang starts us off.
National Security Advisor Ri Song-nak said Friday that a charter flight is being prepared to bring back Koreans currently held by the Cambodian authorities.
While we cannot completely rule out last-minute variables, the plan currently under final discussion with the Cambodian authorities is for a chartered flight to depart Phnom Penh around midnight local time early tomorrow morning, Korea time, bringing the detainees back to Incheon.
Around 60 Koreans, most of them criminal suspects linked to job scam operations, will be on board. A police escort team has already departed from Incheon to ensure safe transfer. We also said that a Korean delegation has met with Cambodia's vice foreign minister over online job scam cooperation and has plans to meet the interior minister as well. Seoul's new ambassador to Phnom Penh will oversee local efforts, while Foreign Minister Cho Hyun held talks with Mekong region envoys. We said Korean missions abroad were told to assess risks and boost cooperation through the UN and OECD. Meanwhile, the presidential office has launched a domestic crackdown on the online recruitment ads that led many Koreans into scam job operations.
President Lee ordered the relevant agencies, including the Korea Communications Commission, the Korea Communications Standards Commission, and the National Police Agency to urgently remove illegal job ads targeting not only Cambodia, but the entire Southeast Asia region.
The government has also set up a consultative body with major tech firms, including Naver, Kakao, and Google, to build a real-time monitoring and removal system. The move aims to prevent scam recruiters from shifting their operations to other Southeast Asian countries as Cambodia tightens enforcement. The government is also preparing to send investigators to Cambodia to observe the autopsy of the Korean student who was one of the most recent victims killed, part of efforts to uncover the full circumstances of the case. The autopsy will most likely be carried out early next week to determine the exact cause and circumstances surrounding the death. 2 investigators from South Korea will be dispatched as early as this weekend to attend the procedure and observe the entire process alongside local officials. These developments come just a day after Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Manet expressed deep regret over the killing of the Korean college student and pledged to strengthen cooperation with Seoul to prevent further crimes. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
South Korea and the U.S. have wrapped up their 2-hour-long tariff negotiations to fine-tune how to finance and profit Seoul's $1 billion investment in Washington. No details like the progress or plans for further talks are not immediately known, but South Korean officials called Thursday's 2-hour talks sufficient. Moon Jung reports.
As high-ranking South Korean government officials have entered the final phase of their talks in the United States, their first day of negotiations concluded with Presidential Chief of Staff for Policy Kim Yong-bum saying that they've had sufficient discussions lasting 2 hours. Presidential Chief of Staff for Policy Kim Yong-bum, Industry Minister Kim Jong-kwan, and Trade Minister Yeo Han-gu met with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick at the Department of Commerce in Washington, D.C. on Thursday. The industry minister met with Lutnick again after approximately 2 weeks to continue discussions aimed at narrowing differences over the proposed $350 billion investment package. Upon their arrival, the minister and presidential chief of staff held their first official meeting with Gov't, director of the Office of Management and Budget, where they discussed measures for shipbuilding cooperation between the 2 countries. While the OMB is not directly involved in tariff negotiations, the South Korean delegation expects that emphasizing Korea-U.S. shipbuilding cooperation will positively influence efforts to reconcile differences regarding the $350 billion investment package.
The OMB is a very crucial entity for the shipbuilding cooperation project. We are visiting the office as we want to listen to what it has to say and share each other's views on shipbuilding industrial cooperation between our country and the U.S.
Earlier, Kim said that both nations are negotiating in the most earnest and constructive atmosphere. Regarding U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's expectation of results within 10 days, the official took it as a positive sign.
When the U.S. expects a result within 10 days, that apparently represents its interim assessment of the negotiations with us. And I read it as a sign that is not bad.
Kim also emphasized the critical importance of the Korea-U.S. summit scheduled for the end of this month, held on the sidelines of the APEC leaders meeting in Gyeongju. Reinforcing the delegation's efforts, Finance Minister Koo Yoon-chol, who is in Washington for the IMF General Assembly, met with Bessent, acknowledging Korea's difficulty in meeting the U.S.'s $350 billion upfront investment demand. He noted that while U.S. secretaries understand Seoul's position, President Donald Trump's persuasion remains uncertain. He expressed concerns that paying the full amount upfront would undoubtedly pose a problem for Korea's foreign exchange stability. 문지영, Arirang News.
South Korea's exports of cosmetics rose to an all-time high in the first 3 quarters of the year. The Korea Customs Service said outbound shipments of cosmetics totaled $8.52 billion in the first 9 months of the year, marking the highest level for the cited period. Korean cosmetics were sold in a total of 205 countries, the largest number ever. Now, by country, the U.S. was the #1 destination, followed by China and Japan, respectively. Regarding categories, skincare products accounted for 41.7% of all overseas sales. The South Korean economy is showing signs of a recovery from a first-half slowdown, backed by a strong job market and a surge in September consumption. But the government's latest monthly assessment maintains a cautious tone, pointing to lingering risks both at home and abroad. Our Kim Do-yeon has more.
The South Korean economy is showing signs of emerging from its first-half slowdown, but persistent risks continue to weigh on the outlook. That's the latest assessment from the Ministry of Economy and Finance in its monthly Green Book report released on Friday. The government diagnosed that key indicators like production and consumption are on a general improvement trend with the help of the recent distribution of spending coupons by the government. Improvements showed on the labor market. According to the Ministry of Data and Statistics, the economy added 312,000 jobs from a year earlier, with the service sector delivering the biggest portion of the growth, with spending on the rise. The employment rate rose by 0.4 percentage points to 63.7%. This came alongside a rebound in private spending. Forward-looking data for September shows domestic credit card spending jumped 8.5% year-on-year, the highest rate this year. Sales of domestically produced cars also hit a yearly high, surging over 18%. And online sales were exceptionally strong, climbing nearly 20%. This recent surge follows a period of weakness. The Finance Ministry reported that retail sales in August had fallen by 2.4% from the month before. And consumer sentiment in September dipped slightly, with the index falling 1.3 points to 110.1. On the trade front, headline figures appear positive. September exports rose 12.6% from the same month last year with the help of more working days. A closer look shows export to the key U.S. market fell by 1%, fueling the government's concerns over risks from international tariff policies. The government pledged to swiftly execute its supplementary budget to support domestic demand while focusing on managing these external challenges. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
With the APEC leaders meeting now just about 2 weeks away, Prime Minister Kim Min-seok, who heads the event's organizing committee, has called for an all-out efforts to ensure the forum runs smoothly and safely. Kim chaired an inspection meeting in Gyeongju, the host city, on Friday, to review preparations for the leaders' meeting and CEO summit, as well as security and emergency response measures. He stressed that all related agencies must thoroughly cross-check potential risks in the final stages to avoid any disruptions. The Prime Minister is scheduled to return to Gyeongju next week for another on-site inspection. Just a day before his scheduled meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, U.S. President Donald Trump held an unexpected phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, which both sides are reported claiming to have been very productive. The leaders have agreed to meet in Hungary within the next 2 weeks. Yoon-jin reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin have agreed to hold a face-to-face meeting in Budapest after a 2.5-hour phone call on Thursday, which was described by both sides as very productive. President Trump also said that he expects the meeting to be held within the coming 2 weeks. The planned summit will be their second in 2 months and signals renewed diplomatic efforts between Washington and Moscow. Trump said Secretary of State Marco Rubio will head a team of senior advisors meeting Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov next week to prepare the agenda. A specific date or location has not been determined yet. Putin's aides called the exchange extremely frank and trustful, while Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban hailed the planned meeting as great news for peace. The Kremlin said that it would immediately start preparing. The call between Trump and Putin came just a day before Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is due at the White House for talks on air defense and long-range missiles. Zelensky is expected to discuss potential supplies of U.S. long-range Tomahawk missiles, which would be capable of reaching Moscow from Ukraine. Zelensky expressed on social media that he hoped for the momentum of the Middle East peace deal to help end the war in Ukraine. When asked earlier in the week, Trump mentioned considering giving Ukraine Tomahawks. But after Putin saying that supplying the Tomahawks to Ukraine would endanger peace efforts, Trump has changed his answer, telling reporters that the U.S. could not deplete its own stock of the guided missiles. Yoon-jin, Arirang News.
Now, over in Japan, Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has made an offering to the Yasukuni Shrine, where Class A war criminals from the Second World War are enshrined. And visiting it means to rationalize Japan's colonization of Korea. According to Kyodo News on Friday, Ishiba made an offering called Masakaki to mark the start of the Autumn Grand Festival. Now, since taking office, he's making offerings or monetary donations instead of visiting the shrine in person. To this, South Korea's Foreign Ministry has expressed regret. A statement read that the government urges Japan's leaders to face history properly and show sincere reflection over the past and remorse through actions. President Ejae sent words of support and encouragement to athletes celebrating a national multi-sport event. He attended the opening ceremony of the 106th National Sports Festival in Busan on Friday. He called every participant a champion for working hard with patience and passion, stressing the sporting value of a mutual respect and solidarity. He also thanked the Korean athletes visiting from overseas, adding that their taking part will help broaden the status of Korea on the world stage. The event runs until October 23rd, where some 30,000 participants will compete. With a growing interest in Korea and thanks to the success of Korean animation K-pop Demon Hunters, and the number of visitors to Nat'l Museum of Korea this year surpassed 5 million. For the first time in its 8-year history, our Kim Bo-kyung tells us more.
Annual visitors to the National Museum of Korea have surpassed 5 million for the first time. According to the museum on Friday, a total of 5,016,382 people visited from January 1st to October 15th this year. Among them, 4.83 million were South Koreans and 185,705 were foreign nationals. This is a 69.7% increase compared to the same period last year. This marks the first time since the museum opened in 1945 that its annual attendance exceeded 5 million in a single year. A growing surge in interest in Korea attributed to the global popularity of Korean culture, including the success of the Netflix's animated series K-pop Demon Hunters, seemingly led to the record. An annual visitor count of over 5 million places the museum in the top 5 globally. According to the art newspaper, the world's most visited museum in 2024, for example, was the Louvre in Paris with over 8.7 million visitors, followed by Vatican Museums, the British Museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and Tate Modern. The National Museum of Korea has 13 affiliated national museums across the country. And with growing interest in Korea, the total number of visitors to all of these museums went over 11 million as well. Visitors to the affiliated national museums accounted for over 6.2 million, a roughly 10% increase compared to last year's. Eyes are now on whether the total visitors to the museum could approach 6 million by the end of the year. The director of the museum said it will aim to become a museum where culture can be enjoyed in everyday life with more exhibitions and improved viewing environment. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
There are many reasons to wait for Fridays, but one of them is definitely the arts and culture coverage by our culture correspondent, Park Konu. He is here in the studio with us. Happy Friday, Konu.
Happy Friday, Tami.
So, Konu, you have quite a rundown, a lineup of one-on-one sit-downs with renowned figures. And tell us about your latest.
Yes, so you might have guessed by looking at my nice-looking golden tie. This time, I met mega singer-songwriter Ejae, who also participated on several soundtracks for K-pop Demon Hunters, including Golden. And she visited Korea this week, and so I got to meet her up, and we talked about the stories behind her chart-topping single Golden, challenges she's faced and had to overcome, and even her next big goals. But before I gave you too much away, first take a look at my interview with her. Up, 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 Ejae goes, breaking records by topping the Billboard Hot 100 for 8 straight weeks. When Golden first hit #1, she says there was one person she couldn't stop thinking about.
The first thing I thought of was 11, 12-year-old Ejae working her butt off in the studio at SM. And it felt, a little message to her if it reached, that you did so good.
For more than 2 decades, she's faced her share of hardships, especially during her 10+ years as a K-pop trainee. Though she failed to debut as an idol back then, she says every moment happened for a reason.
I never, ever thought I'd be a songwriter in my life. That was never in my wish list. It just kind of organically happened when, after I came out of SM, I didn't know what I was supposed to do.
She spent long hours working alone, training herself to be better at songwriting. Then came the pandemic.
When that happened, we had to stay home. So it was hard, but it was honestly in a way amazing. It was a great experience because that's when I actually learned how to teach myself how to record. And a lot of songwriters don't really know how to record themselves or mix.
Through lessons learned from hard times, she joined the K-pop Demon Hunters team and helped spark a global phenomenon. As excitement builds for a possible sequel, Ejae told us about her creative ideas without hesitation.
트로트, literally. That would be amazing. So we'd love to explore the 판소리 아리랑 world.
And with the soundtrack's success, Golden was submitted in multiple categories for next year's Grammy Awards, boosting her chances for a win.
Winning a Grammy Award is just truly something I wish I saw a fellow Korean American woman, Asian American woman in the industry to win. It would open doors for so many people.
After all these achievements, she reflects on what her younger self might say to her today. What do you think 11-year-old Ejae would tell you, seeing you now in one of your most golden moments of your life?
Oh my God, that's another emotional question. I think she'd just be thank you.
At the same time, she admits feeling pressure as expectations on her are so high.
Be like water. And I love that saying. That's kind of the concept of whatever comes your way, even if there's a lot of pressure, just do your best. do whatever you can and 최선을 다해.
She also offered a heartfelt message to anyone chasing their dreams.
If my story helps, please work hard, be resilient, be kind to yourself, and also be kind to others. Everyone needs a little bit of kindness.
With that mindset, Ejae says she's working on her next steps, getting better at songwriting and exploring who she is as an artist, poised to shine golden as she was born to be.
Konu, what an amazing interview. But now, beside her amazing voice, she's also written a lot of K-pop songs, right?
A bunch. I mean, like, just to name a few, she's written like Psycho by Red Velvet, Drama and Armageddon by aespa.
All famous.
I can go on and on. I can do this all day. But I just named a few, but honestly, each of those is one of my favorites of each artist. And naturally, I was curious how she comes up with all these inspiration. And she's well known to have gotten inspiration for the highlight melodies of Golden on her way to the dentist. So I asked her for any other random moments when inspiration just strikes.
Drama, I was watching TikTok and I saw this fabulous drag queen and she kept saying like, am I the drama? I'm not the drama, am I? Maybe I am the drama. And I love that saying. And so that's kind of where I got the inspiration for that song.
Well, I'm sure there are a lot of fans who can't wait to hear more of her songs. What are her future plans?
So she's actually going to release a new single. It's actually being her first solo single ever, and it's called In Another World, which will be dropped on the 24th. And she explains it as a very peaceful and calm song that she's been keeping to herself for quite a while. And I'm sure many of you are wondering what it'll sound like. So, well, I've brought a short exclusive spoiler. So those who missed it might regret it. So here we go. But can you also give us a little exclusive spoiler, like a little hum or something?
Okay. Da-da-da-da. That's it.
So she also shared her desire to collaborate with global artists, including BTS and Dua Lipa. But when she also says collaboration with pop artists, she means adding a touch of Korean style to the mix. So that's definitely an intriguing project we should look forward to, since she also says she has lots of music that's unrevealed yet.
All right, Konu, thanks for coming in tonight. You have a lovely weekend.
You too. Have a golden weekend.
Rain is forecast across the country again starting from tonight. This rain will continue until tomorrow morning. About 20 to 70 millimeters of rain is expected in eastern parts of Gangwon-do province, 10 to 50 in Chungcheongnam-do and Jeollabuk-do provinces, and 10 to 40 millimeters in the rest areas. In particular, between dawn and morning tomorrow, there will be heavy rain of around 20 millimeters per hour in Chungcheongnam-do provinces and the Jeollado provinces. The temperatures will drop sharply as cold air comes down from the north from tomorrow. On Monday, the morning temperature in Seoul will plummet to 5 degrees Celsius, bringing a sudden cold. Tomorrow morning, Seoul will start off at 16 degrees, Busan at 21 degrees. Daily highs will rise up to 19 to 24 degrees all over the country. For the time being, frequent rain is expected in the eastern parts of Gangwon-do province. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That's all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.
To set the facts straight. Get Korea right.
안녕하세요. 저는 방크에서 활동하는 홍단비 청년연구원입니다. 대한민국이라는 국가가 존재한다는 사실을 전 세계에 알리는 공식적인 징표이자 국민을 하나로 통합하게 하는 힘을 가진 이것. 바로 태극기인데요. 일제강점기 당시 태극기는 우리 민족을 하나로 통합시키는 구심점 같은 역할을 하기도 했죠. 대한민국 국기인 태극기에 대해 잘못 알고 있거나 오해하는 부분들이 가끔 발견되더라고요. 제가 태극기에 담긴 의미와 역사에 대해 제대로 알려드릴게요. 최초의 태극기는 1882년에 처음 만들어졌다고 해요. 이후 다양한 형태의 태극기가 제작됐다가 지금은 국가에서 국기를 체계적으로 관리하는 법을 만들어 시행하고 있어요. 태극기에 담긴 의미를 알아볼까요? 먼저 흰색 바탕은 밝음과 순수, 그리고 평화를 사랑하는 우리의 민족성을 나타내요. 태극기 가운데에는 태극 문양이 들어가는데요. 이 태극 문양은 우주 만물이 음양의 조화로 인해 생물을 얻고 발전한다는 대자연의 진리를 표현한 것이라고 해요. 다음으로 건공감리를 그려볼게요. 4개 모서리에 그린 4괴에는 각기 다른 의미가 있어요. 건괴는 하늘, 곤괴는 땅, 감괴는 물, 이괴는 불을 상징해요. 우리 선조들이 생활 속에서 즐겨 쓰던 태극 문양을 중심으로 만들어진 태극기는 우주와 더불어 끝없이 창조와 번영을 바라는 우리 민족의 이상을 담고 있답니다. 대한민국의 정체성과 자긍심을 드러내고 우리 민족을 하나로 뭉치게 하는 태극기, 우리의 자랑스러운 국가 상징입니다. 한국 바로 알리기. 여러분도 함께 해주세요.
Held its first debate over the weekend.
The economy is expected to expand 2.5% this year.
Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of the status to Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gyan. The upcoming APEC leaders meeting in Gyeongju is drawing global attention, not just for economic talks, but for its diplomatic stakes. A possible U.S.-China summit, renewed North Korea-U.S. dialogue, and South Korea's balancing act between both powers are all in focus. As President Ejae aims to secure meaningful outcomes, new sanctions and unresolved trade tensions are raising the pressure. With multiple summits potentially unfolding, APEC 2025 could prove to be a key moment in reshaping the region's diplomatic landscape. To break down how the key diplomatic flashpoints surrounding the APEC would evolve, we have Robert Kelly, Professor of International Relations at Busan National University. A big welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
And also joining us is Christophe Godin, Professor of Political Science at Kookmin University. Good to see you, Professor.
Yeah, good to see you again. Good evening.
So let's begin our discussion with Professor Kelly. So there's growing interest in whether a U.S.-China summit will take place on the sidelines of the APEC. With trade tensions between Washington and Beijing once again escalating, many see this as a strategic move to gain leverage. I wonder, how do you interpret the current signals from both sides?
Well, I'm just pleased that there's going to be a summit at all. I mean, just a week ago, Donald Trump sort of threw out that threat on Twitter or through social or whatever, they're going to have a 100% tariff, and the market dropped 900 points within 24 hours. I think that's probably why this is actually happening. I think Donald Trump has realized that the United States has some real vulnerabilities to China on this, particularly on rare earths. I think that's pretty well understood at this point. The Chinese have some real leverage against the Americans on this, right? The Chinese increasingly diversified away from the U.S. market, so American market access isn't quite what it was before. Donald Trump has also proven to be a highly unreliable trade partner for the Chinese and others, and so I think the Chinese are willing to take a tougher line, and I think Trump wasn't quite ready for that, and he's backed away in the last couple of days, and I think that's really the driver behind this, is to find some kind of modus vivendi between the two sides in the trade war.
Right, so it kind of feels like both sides are using the APEC stage to send signals, whether for leverage or for pressure. Now, continuing from there, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent recently stated that President Trump will meet Chinese President Xi in Korea, appearing to rule out the chance of a failed summit. So, Professor Godin, what variables could still affect the outcome at this point?
Well, as Professor Kelly mentioned, what we are attending now is basically a show of strength between both superpowers. Because so far, if you consider these tariffs that Trump has been forcing on all other countries, basically all over the world, not only Korea, but also the EU, Japan, had no choice but to surrender. China is, it is sad to say that China so far is the only one that is big enough, powerful enough. It's the only one that tried to retaliate to Trump, all the way, for instance, to trying to force 150% tariff on U.S. exports from April to May. However, what is happening too at the same time is that China needs these U.S. exports. The Chinese economy, as you know, is slowing down. And as far as we can tell, it doesn't seem that the domestic consumption in China is taking over, to put it mildly. So I think they will have to compromise. I don't know how or when, but both the US, but also China as well, are not in a good place for the moment. So the way I see it, they will need to find a way to compromise. How? I have no idea.
Right, it's definitely a tough question to, resolve and to predict, of course. We're still speculating at this point. But now let's shift a little bit to the trade front. So the U.S. and China have been shifting the target list from rare earths to soybeans to cooking oil in a tit-for-tat pattern of trade retaliation. So if this summit actually goes ahead, Professor Kelly, do you think there's room for a breakthrough or compromise in the tariff war? And if a top-level deal proves difficult, would back channel or working level talks be more realistic at this point?
I do think there's a lot of room, just sort of by the rational economics of it. Yes, I think there is, right? I mean, the U.S. and China had a pretty dense relationship for such a long time that we, for a few years there, used the term chimerica to refer to the relationship. The two sides were so interwoven, right? I mean, this choice by both sides, I think, to de-link and fairly rapidly in the last couple of years really has been a political one, right? I mean, this is not really something that is being pushed by Wall Street or the business communities in either countries. This is really a political, increasingly a strategic discussion. And so I think there is, in fact, a lot of room to compromise, right? I mean, the most obvious thing the Americans could do is stop with the erratic tariffs, right? And a lot of that is driven by Trump himself, his own personal psychology, his deep commitment to tariffs. I mean, he very strongly believes in tariffs, which is something that most economists, of course, don't think is correct. Trump's also very erratic, right? I mean, he sort of swings from one day to the next. You know, so if Trump can bring those basic impulses under control the way many of his predecessors did, of course, you know, that creates a lot of room for the Chinese to make counter concessions. I think that's really ultimately the issue, right? Is that, and Trump, you know, that he's so unpredictable, right? That he so enjoys sort of swinging and changing his mind and being on television all the time as we go from one thing to another, that I just don't know if Trump can bring enough stability to the relationship, right, to actually resolve. And I think that's actually probably one of the reasons why the Chinese are doing this, because they're probably just sick of the last 9 months of the roller coaster, and they're trying to sort of push Trump into some kind of stability and regularity on this. And I just don't know if he's psychologically capable of doing it.
So we'll have to see in the coming days. We'll be able to see that. Now let's shift gears a little bit. South Korea's unification minister Chung Dong-young has raised the possibility that a North Korea-U.S. summit could also take shape during the APEC. Professor Godang, from your perspective, how realistic do you think is this scenario?
With President Trump, I wouldn't call anything unrealistic, because it is a fact that he likes to take everybody by surprise. He likes to be on TV on the time, and I think that in reality, he acts crazy, and he's not crazy at all. He knows what he's doing to an extent. So now, to answer your question, I do not think a summit of some kind is unrealistic eventually, because after all, it took place before, and it took place in a third country, that was in Singapore in 2018. So something relatively similar to the possibility you're bringing up. That being said, what I think to be unrealistic would be to expect anything substantial from such a meeting, because the only thing the US is interested in regarding North Korea is denuclearization. North Korea is no trade partner. There is nothing to discuss but nuclear weapons. And the one thing Kim Jong-un is never to give up on is nuclear weapons. So maybe they may meet, I have no idea actually. But if they do, they will snap a few pictures, they will be advertised all over the world, and most likely nothing will unfold the way it did 7 years ago, and for the very same reasons, I think. About the summit, it may or may not happen. About the outcome, nothing substantial is to be expected, I think, in the near future.
So in a nutshell, they could meet or not, but whether they would be able to reach a deal, we're really not sure about that. Now, if a North Korea-U.S. summit then would actually happen, Professor Kelly, how do you see Pyongyang's strategy towards both Washington and Seoul evolve? And what kind of diplomatic repositioning do you think this could mean for South Korea?
So if this happened, and if it was meaningful, I think Dr. Garneau is right, that even if they did meet, it wouldn't be particularly meaningful. It'd just be a lot of photo ops. And that's very Trumpian, right? It's all about the TV and everything. But if it were actually substantive, I think the North Koreans are in a pretty good place, right? I mean, I think they're in a better position than they were 7 years ago. The Russians, for example, now stand behind the North Koreans. North Korea's got a larger arsenal. It's better tested. It's got more missiles. So it's got more to trade away, or more to at least sort of bargain for concessions. I don't think the North Koreans would give up everything. I think denuclearization is unlikely, but the North Koreans might give up a little bit or something in exchange for a major concession from the U.S., like they're rolling back the sanctions or something. But I mean, we know from the way the North Koreans negotiate and have for several decades that they're tough players. right? That they're going to demand a lot for a little. And this is why I think that even if, again, I think Dr. Godon was right here, that even if you had the summit, not much would come from it, because if you're going to really get into the details of North Korea, you got to do a lot of prep work. You got to do a lot of groundwork for a breakthrough. And Trump just hasn't done that. He didn't do that back in 2017 and 18, right? And so even if you were to meet with him now, unless there'd been a lot of staff work in the run-up, I mean, like months of effort trying to figure out like what we could give up to North Korea in exchange for what, then nothing would really come of it, because the North Koreans aren't going to agree to some kind of, Trumpian song and dance about, oh, we'll build a Trump Tower in Pyongyang. The North Koreans aren't going to get taken like that. Trump's got to offer something really meaningful, and he just hasn't prepped the country, Congress, the U.S. military, the South Koreans to make any kind of a major concession, right? And, if he did, and the South Koreans didn't like it, that could lead to an alliance breach. I just can't. It's very, very hard to foresee anything coming from a summit in the next, month.
Right, especially with a lot of things happening across the globe. North Korea could have been at the bottom of Trump's priorities as well. Now, meanwhile, there's also rising anticipation over a possible Ijae, President Donald Trump summit. Do you think this could serve as a breakthrough moment for the stalled tariff negotiations between the two countries, Professor Godot?
Well, it can, because it's already happened. The last time they met, so it was last summer, what is interesting about all of it is that during his campaign, Lee Jae-myung, for the most part, dodged international issues. He wouldn't discuss Trump, he wouldn't discuss North Korea. And so there was a lot of anticipation as to how we would be able to manage a meeting, a negotiation with a partner that is as unreliable, as erratic, as chaotic even, as President Trump. And so far, South Korea has been taking a very proactive approach that's proved successful as far as we can tell. For instance, if you think of this Make American Shipbuilding Great Again plan, it is something simple they could sell to Trump, and of course something that Trump in turn could sell to the American public opinion. As a result, tariffs have decreased significantly from 25 to 15%, and 2 points. First, Korean exports to the US have decreased, but not by much, by 1%, which is, of course, not to be compared with these 15% tariffs that are paid by American consumers anyway, not by Koreans directly. That's the first point. And second, anyway, Korea is not in a bad place at all, because Korea, for the most part, has been able to compensate, in reality, overcompensate with other trading partners. So most likely there will be a meeting, and so far the strategy of the Lee administration has been successful, and much more so than Japan's or France's or Germany's in the EU, for instance. So far so good, and there is no reason I can think of to think that it is not to continue this way, at least in the months to come.
Right, so we will be hoping for a little bit of more details after the two leaders would be able to meet. Now, a South Korea-China summit is also expected to take place on the sidelines of APEC, but there are concerns over, Beijing's recent announcement of sanctions targeting Hanwha Ocean's operations in the U.S. Professor Kelly, what's the likely motivation behind these sanctions on a South Korean firm, and how should the Korean government navigate this diplomatically?
Yeah, so I think the Chinese are beginning to sense that with the decline of America's overseas commitment, right, with the decline of the domestic commitment in the United States to a forward commitment in Europe and Asia, that there is sort of room to push. There's a lot of rumors that when the U.S. National Military Strategy or the U.S. National Security Strategy, these are big documents from the Pentagon, when these are released in the next 6 months or so, that they will state that the primary focus of U.S. grand strategy is now the Western Hemisphere. If that's true, that creates room for the Chinese and the Russians to push. And I think particularly for China, given that it's so much more powerful, of course, than Russia, and is arguably a peer competitor to the United States at this point, I think that's the way to read these things. In the same way, for example, the Chinese have begun to put fishing installations in the Yellow Sea, right? We don't actually know quite what they are because they keep sort of driving back the South Korean Navy. But that's the way I read this, that this is sort of like China beginning to feel that it has a real opportunity here because Donald Trump is just not really doing a very good job grooming American allies, right? I mean, after that thing in Georgia with ICE and the Korean employees, I mean, the Koreans are really angry. And, you know, Trump is all over the place on tariffs with a lot of other U.S. partners in Asia. It looks like the submarine deal with Australia is going to fall apart. I mean, Trump just doesn't seem to want to sort of build a sort of durable allied coalition against China, for example, to block China's rise in the region. And that's the way I interpret this. The Chinese see an opportunity to push the Koreans when the Americans aren't terribly reliable. And that's what they'll be doing here. I would imagine you'll see these kinds of things more and more in the future.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Now, speaking of which, you know, a little bit to the broader U.S.-China rivalry. As for South Korea, Professor Godang, what kind of role do you think Seoul should play as a mediator or a balancing actor in the region?
I'm not sure my opinion matters much. What I can tell you is that I've heard a lot of American officials and academics privately in conferences, and even last time I joined you on your set a couple of weeks ago, if you remember, it is very, very, very dangerous an approach, they say, because it doesn't play well in DC, because I understand the rationale behind it, and I do think the Korean government means well, but the reason why it doesn't play well in Washington, according to most Americans I was able to discuss the subject with, is that first, it makes it sound like Americans and Chinese are not able to manage their own business. And also, if Korea were to serve as a go-between, what would this mean concretely? To say what, to organize what discussions? Chinese see South Korea to be a US ally, and objectively it is. And so therefore, as South Korea is not neutral, how could you be expected to bridge between such opposite interests? If you were, say, I don't know, Switzerland or Sweden even, you wouldn't be part of the issue. But Korea is very much involved into whatever's happening on the Korean peninsula. So I think this approach is dangerous. If Korea wants to host talks the way Singapore years ago, is for the greater good, but getting involved into these talks, objectively, I think there is a lot to lose and nothing concrete to win, I could think of, concretely speaking.
Right. So you mean we should be able to take a more cautious approach when speaking of the term mediator between the two superpowers, of course. Now, finally, before we conclude our discussion tonight, from the perspective of the Ijae administration, Professor Kelly, what would constitute meaningful diplomatic results coming out of the Gyeongju APEC leaders meeting?
If the administration can broker a meaningful sit down between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping and they actually come out with some kind of statement on the trade war, right, as the two biggest economies in the system, that would be in itself a major success. I think any kind of a binding multilateral statement or agreement in a club as diverse as APEC is unlikely, right? I mean, APEC stretches from like Russia to Chile. I mean, that's, it's pretty difficult. Instead, I think some bilateral meetings that return some real value on, say, the trade war, on Ukraine, on North-South relations, U.S. relations with South Korea, something like that. That would be a success, right? Some kind of bilateral or minilateral statement that actually really binds the two players. And I think probably China and the U.S. is probably the most important one.
Right. With the spotlight on APEC, the stakes are high for Seoul to walk away with something concrete. We'll have to leave our discussion right here for tonight. Thank you so much for your sharp analysis and for your time tonight, Professor Kelly.
Thanks for having me.
And Professor Godang, of course, we really appreciate it.
The pleasure's mine. Thank you.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.
feeling overwhelmed by a busy life,